I am the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I want to talk about the paradox of tolerance for the faithful. A devout believer of a specific religion, given the strength of her devotion, is likely to hold that the doctrines of her religion are the monolithic truth and that her gods are the true gods. Since there are many religions, they cannot all be true if her religion is the true one. Therefore, she must conclude that the other religions must be false. There hence exists a tension between tolerance, pluralism, and truth, with religious ideologies as a potential source of intolerance. Johan De Tavernier examines this tension at the institutional, cultural, and theological levels, explaining how our understanding of tolerance has evolved and can be justified. However, there is a paradox between a staunch religious belief and a tolerance for the belief of others. This paradox can be resolved if we understand that intolerance, justice, and love for others is more important than judging whose version of the truth is right. I propose some practical measures that believers can take in the face of the challenge from tolerance, in line with De Tavernier's belief that believers should avoid fanaticism and instead adopt a quiet conviction. Chapter 1: A Brief History of Tolerance. De Tavernier, in his essay Tolerance, Pluralism, and Truth, posits that it is quite normal that the stronger your own conception about truth is, the more difficult is it to reconcile with a certain appreciation of a pluralistic culture. He uses Paul Ricoeur's 3 levels surrounding the question of tolerance to guide his analysis. These 3 levels are the institutional level of state and church, the cultural level, which is the opinions, thoughts, and views in which people think about their relationship with others, and the religious and theological level, which is what the religion itself has to say regarding the question of truth and tolerance. One attitude of religious tolerance may be the conventional position to hold today. The reader should be reminded that up until the French Revolution of 1789, the separation of church and state was unheard of in Europe. Both institutions supported each other and reinforced each other's power. Religious intolerance was the norm, where both Protestants and Catholics were convinced that there was no place for other religions or even different confessions of a Christian nature. This position was already an advance from the Middle Ages, when the rulers decided what should be the only religion of their people. The Enlightenment, beginning in the 17th century, was a reaction against the domination of religion in a much trumpeted triumph of reason over faith. However, this epoch did not lead to an abandonment of religion, but instead gave rise to a pluralism in religious beliefs. Freedom of religion, as an individual right to freedom, was born, wrote De Tavernier. In the West, the rise of the secular state reduced the power of the church. Tolerance then meant a curtailment of the state's role in religious belief and the church's role in the policies of the state. In such a secular state, the state needs to be neutral regarding religious matters. The state must see itself as the arbitrator between the competing pretensions and not as a tribunal of the truth, wrote De Tavernier. The concept of tolerance continued to evolve from this negative conception to a delicate positive tolerance of the recognition of the rights of others to possess and profess their own beliefs, according to Ricoeur. This positive tolerance was the result of a dialectical synthesis of 2 intolerances: the intolerance of the religious who did not tolerate other religions, and the intolerance of the atheists who did not tolerate the religious. In recognizing the rights of those of other religious persuasions and atheists to exist and profess their faiths, there was some sacrifice made at the cultural level for the believers of the dominant religion, since it can be difficult to accept the existence of those with differing beliefs. If the dominant group do not accept that others have a right to profess their beliefs and defend it in the same way the dominant group can, there is a violence of conviction, or rather violence in conviction. Tolerance would mean limiting such violence. At the institutional level, tolerance is justified by justice as fairness, while at the cultural level, tolerance is justified by a respect for the conviction of others. Such a respect implies that we have to accept that our strongly held religious beliefs are just one among many opinions. At the theological level, violence of conviction was a norm in the past as the religious authorities visited punishment on atheists and heretics out of a fear of relativism or indifferentism. However, due to political secularization at the institutional level and the acceptance of pluralism at the cultural level, the church also had to change tactics from conviction by aggression to a peacefulness of testimony, from force to persuasion. How can this be justified theologically? Drawing on the ideas of key thinkers since the Renaissance, De Tavernier outlined a progression in the theological understanding of tolerance, as well as intermediate setbacks such as the Counter-Reformation. He started with Nicholas Cusanus in the 15th century, who thought that religions are hypotheses that have to be improved continuously, and so they cannot claim to be absolutely and exclusively valid. Cusanus sees the different conceptions of God as projections of the thinking mind about an object, hence their variety, explains De Tavernier. Desiderius Erasmus introduced a humanistic approach characterized by rational persuasion and spiritual appeal. He is against fundamentalism, where fanatics impose their religious beliefs on others. He argues that the Christian God precisely wants multiplicity. Another humanist, Sebastian Castillo, objects to killing heretics. Not only did he think such actions were unchristian, arguing based on the Bible, natural law, and the writings of the Church Fathers, he thought they were unconscionable. It is not allowable to kill someone even to protect doctrine, he wrote. Instead, defenders of biblical doctrine should do so through persuasion. All these thinkers paved the way for the development of human rights. French Chancellor Michel de l'Hopital believes that people came to religion through good example rather than through force. Voltaire argues that force produces hypocrisy and conflicts with the gospel. According to De Tavernier, there was a growing conviction over time that the Christian message itself demands tolerance, since Jesus never imposed his views, did not use violence, but instead convinced his believers through an affectionate praxis of caring proximity. Chapter 2. Difficulties for the religious. However, being tolerant leads to difficulties for the religious. We shall examine these difficulties for Christianity specifically. Firstly, other branches of Christianity and other religions have criticized how Western Christendom has become too tolerant. Secondly, the Christian doctrine claims a universal applicability and a monolithic truth, which is at odds with pluralism. This weakening of belief leads to a weakening of identity. A culture that adopts a tolerant attitude loses persuasiveness. The more tolerant Western industrial societies became, the more difficult it became to give meaning and orientation to experiences, observes De Tavernier. He believes that a sharp profiling of the religion may be the obvious solution to the problem of a weakening identity, but he recognizes that such a sharpening might lead to less tolerance. He relates how the art and media world had mocked the Christian faith without repercussions, while other religions, such as Islam, would not have tolerated such a mockery. He wrote the essay in 2004, but the point he makes here is particularly pertinent given the recency of the beheading of French school teacher Samuel Paty in October 2020 for showing his students cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad in a class on free speech. By being overly tolerant, one may be seen as not taking one's religion seriously. Even putting aside a comparison with other religions, it can be argued that Christians have permitted too great a relaxation, for instance, allowing the birth of their Savior to be made into a commercial gift-giving occasion, such that Christmas is more associated with Santa Claus than the birth of Christ. Even his death has been trivialized with the now established traditions of egg hunting and Easter bunnies. This relaxed attitude becomes starker when we do compare with other religions. Would Muslims have permitted their religious holidays, such as the month of Ramadan, to be associated with such frivolity? As De Tavernier pointedly asks us, the question is whether one must respect those who pay no respect to one's own belief. Could this lack of self-respect be a contributing factor why the number of Christians is on the decline, while Islam has become the fastest growing major world religion? Chapter 3. Paradox between religion and tolerance. The Bible commands Christians to spread the good news and proselytize to the unbelievers. How can believers then allow untruths in the form of other faiths to exist alongside her own? Would tolerating such untruths mean that she is then tolerating sin and lies and may face condemnation from her God? But did the Bible not also command her to love her neighbor as she loves herself? If she allows her neighbor to go to hell because of the wrong choice of religion or unbelief, is she still a good neighbor? Herein lies the paradox that she faces between obeying the commands in her religion and tolerating other faiths. According to Curie, the paradox between religion and tolerance is how every monotheistic religion pretends to hold a leash on truth, and they claim universality while disqualifying other convictions as human inventions. Is tolerance then possible for the religious? Certainly, others can have their own beliefs, but surely those beliefs cannot be true. De Tavernier explained Curie's position. In the best case, that weaker form of tolerance is a small honor to the person of the tolerated, but not to the tolerated subject itself. Behind that form of tolerance, an actual intolerance is hiding. Tolerance is extended to the other as a courtesy, though the fact remains that the belief of the other is plainly false. Is this form of tolerance good enough, or as De Tavernier asks, can there be a fruitful tension between a strong religious belief and tolerance for other beliefs? He turns to Frank Bockel for an answer. Bockel argues that the right posture towards tolerance is not about one's stance on truth, but about our relationship with other fellow human beings. When we talk about tolerating, the aspects justice and love are the most important rather than judging. The question behind a tolerant attitude is not at all whether my fellow human whose conviction I tolerate is right or wrong, but whether someone has the right not to be disturbed or hampered by the community while practicing or declaring one's own conviction. People do have that right as long as they do not violate other people's rights, wrote Bockel. Tolerance means respecting the rights of others. Inherent in this idea is the notion of reciprocity, where we tolerate others so that others would likewise tolerate us. This is in keeping with Kant's categorical imperative to act only in accordance with that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it became a universal law. Christians will recognize another formulation of the imperative, known as the Golden Rule from the Bible, to do to others as you would have them do to you. Chapter 4. What should believers do? Conversion by the sword through violence is no longer an option today, though in the past it was the norm. For better or worse, society almost everywhere has evolved to become secular, and believers have to navigate their way around a long list of controversial topics. Those of the moment around the world include abortion, euthanasia, suicide, sexual promiscuity, decriminalization of drugs, gambling, and sexual orientation. Their approach, if tolerant, may attract and revive the relevance of their religion in a secularized world, or if conservative, might repel this same group. On the other hand, a conservative posture can attract serious believers while losing the less serious or the impious, which is not much of a loss since they are after all not serious. From Cusanus to Bockel, De Tavernier has presented arguments for tolerance, but what should believers actually do? I propose some helpful attitudes and actions. Believers ought to know at least the key doctrines of their faith well, so they can have intelligent conversations with inquisitive non-believers. They need to try to understand the perspective of others, taking a charitable, if not sympathetic view, and be good ambassadors of their religion, acting in such a way that non-believers can see that religion has had a positive impact on their behavior, even while recognizing that the faithful remain fallible. De Tavernier concludes that while the truth is not relative, our knowledge of it is always relative since it is always incomplete. No one, not even a church, holds all the truth. Hence, he suggests for believers to exercise a quiet conviction and avoid fanaticism. I interpret this quietness of conviction to mean that believers can feel free to be strict on themselves in their own practices, but that does not mean they are permitted to impose their comprehensive doctrines on those who do not share their beliefs. Religious institutions such as the church and other non-Christian religious organizations have become roadblocks to liberal values. Just one example among a long list of objections from such organizations is the revival of strict abortion restrictions in Poland in October 2020, which is largely attributed to the Catholic Church. Certainly, the faithful are free not to have abortions, but it is bewildering why they think others who do not share their convictions have to be bound by them. Believers in religions that do not look kindly on homosexuality, such as Islam and Christianity, are free not to have sex with others of the same sex, or for that matter, not to have sex outside of marriage. Likewise, they do not have to change their genders, commit suicide, euthanize, be vegetarians, take drugs, gamble, eat unpermitted food, or drink alcohol. They are free to be as strict on themselves as they wish, or as they feel they are commanded to be. These, however, do not permit them to impose their values on others, since no one is forcing them to have gay or adulterous sex or do any of the above. The religious, in these cases, seem to be demanding a one-sided reciprocity, which is not reciprocity at all. It is intolerance. Tolerance for others' beliefs is a matter of justice, respect, and reciprocity, and not so much about who is right on what is the truth. At the institutional level of the state, a neutral justice is expected. At the cultural level, we have to respect one another's beliefs. At the theological level, arguments can be found in religious doctrines advocating for tolerance. As Bockel argues on tolerance, justice and love is more important than judgment. On the practical level, I propose some useful attitudes and actions, such as for the religious to know their own faith well and be good examples in their conduct. In that way, they will be ambassadors for their respective religions. De Tavernier advocates a quiet conviction, which I interpret to be for believers to be as tough as they like on themselves, but to not impose their views on others who may wish to adopt more liberal values. As Jesus says, first take the plank out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Thank you.